Aloha kakiake Hawaii, this is Pokalai Nui, and you are listening to Hawaiian Potpourri. Today is Sunday, the 29th day of April in the year 2012. Welcome to the program. We are produced by the Hawaiian National Broadcast Corporation. The opinions expressed in this program are not necessarily those of the staff and management of this radio station or of the Hawaiian National Broadcast Corporation. Last night we had a number of discussions and tried to give you some opportunity to call and share your opinion. If you were not able to get in, our telephone lines are available, and I'll leave them open from the very beginning of this program. Telephone number here is 524-1080. If you would like to join us in discussions of some of the issues we talked about last night or this morning, give us a call and we'll put you on the radio. Last night we spoke about, what was it? GMO. Should GMO be labeled? And this relates to a city council resolution that was debated on the 25th of April, I believe it was. And it was a very long city council meeting, and among the agendas there was a question of GMO labeling or non-labeling. They also talked about rail and continuing to finance rail, and some caveat placed on the agreement to go ahead and allow bonds to be floated, I guess. And the caveat is that this allowance would occur only upon the feds giving their approval for the additional funds. At the present time, there has been this dance around this subject of whether or not they would or would not approve. And so the city council is saying, okay, no more of this financing until the feds commit themselves. Oftentimes the feds have been asking, well, we're not seeing enough commitment by the state. And so, I'm sorry, not the state, by the city council. And so the city council sort of spun it around and essentially put the onus, or some of the onus, on the feds themselves. Other than rail was, of course, that issue of GMO. GMO, genetically modified organisms. I like to think of it instead as a gross mutation of organisms. And it's so gross, and it affects the very DNA, it seems, of the organism itself. When you attach a human gene to a plant gene and then produce a different variety or a changed species, I think that's a gross mutation of organisms. At least that's my belief. And I think those kinds of stuff should be labeled. Now, on the other side, they say, well, it doesn't affect the taste. You cannot see any change in the color. It's sort of so secretive that why should it be labeled in the first place? And there's no scientific evidence to show that it's dangerous in any way. It has no scientific evidence to show that there's a negative effect on the human person. And so why label it? Because it'll just give a false impression. On the other hand, those who support labeling, and I include myself in that category, is saying, why should we elevate this scientist as the head priest in terms of all knowledge? You know, it was those very scientists who told us not to worry about DDT. And so as they sprayed the DDT throughout our countrysides and probably in the city to kill mosquitoes, we were told it's not going to have a bad effect on the human being. And so we ended up chasing after these fog trucks as they went through our streets. Later on, of course, they found that DDT was very bad for the human being, and now it's absolutely restricted from use. It's the same with Monsanto and their announcements, joined by the U.S. military, who we would assume was interested in protecting its soldiers. that Agent Orange, Agent Blue, and all these other rainbow of agents was okay because it would only kill plants but not human beings. So they defoliated the forest and fields in Vietnam. And after 500,000 dead Vietnamese, then there's a little bit more evidence that, well, maybe Monsanto was lying or simply was not well informed. But not only the Vietnamese, it included American soldiers who suffered, either died or suffered from many different types of cancers and many other ailments. The military itself refused to admit. Why? Because they took the word of Monsanto, the scientist. And for decades, American soldiers have been trying to collect as a result of war injuries, but they were denied. Many of them died, still having had their injuries denied as having any relationship to their participation in war. Now we know that indeed Agent Orange was cancer-producing, is very bad. Science has changed. The scientists, these priests of knowledge, previously were wrong. Now it's GMO. Oh, don't worry about it. It has no bad effect on the human being or on our animals or on anything else. Only the insects, only the insects that attack our plants, and so we're protecting our plants. Well, if it kills the insects, what is the effect on negative implications for human beings? But scientists say there is no specific evidence, so there should be no notice, warnings, or even, lesser than warnings, just notice that this is a GMO-tainted food. I come down on the side of greater information. The city council has come down on the side of we will not label or require labeling. I think the city council has made a grand mistake. I want to congratulate Tulsi Gabbard. Never met the woman personally, but she introduced the resolution at the city council. And Tom Berg, who was a very strident supporter of labeling GMO products. Other than that, the city council did a very good job of respectfully listening to all of the presenters, and that I comment on with great support. Congratulations, especially to the chairperson who conducted the meeting in a very well conducted, well functioned meeting. So he did a good job. Stood for the whole day, it seemed, while he conducted the city council meetings. I was also there for another event, which I didn't talk about earlier, and which I won't bring up as a subject matter here. Last night we also talked about the issue of education and the theoretical basis for education and what are the foundation. Why education? What is the meaning of, or what is the purpose of education? And is education the same for all people, for all times? And what is that purpose? At times we look at education as a way of extending beyond our physical self to understand what is happening in other parts of the world, to understand what is happening in science, in technology, in philosophy, and all of those many, many things. So for that purpose, education, I believe, is excellent. But education is also culture-bound. The way in which you look at different things are based on culture of the society that produces a particular educational theme or an educational curriculum. Are we all of the same, or should we all be similarly culture-bound in the education that we undertake? And if that is the case, what culture should we come from? Should it be from a science culture? Should it be from a religious culture? Should it be from an environmental culture? Should it be from the perspectives of the first people of this land? Or should it be from the colonizer who comes into a land and imposes its culture on that land? And to suggest that, well, before this education system came into these lands, there was no such system among the indigenous people, which is simply an indication of the lack of sensitivity and of information on the part of the critics of indigenous communities. What is the purpose or the outlook for indigenous communities for education? Is it merely to learn of the science of the Western culture or the colonizing culture? And so in that discussion, we came out, or at least I came out with a group of us who had met several years ago, maybe a decade and a half ago, in a group led by Ho'ipo de Canberra, who was a community scholar in residence at the University of Hawaii in Manoa. And when she was selected, she says, I'm willing to do it. However, I insist that 50% of our classes at least be conducted in the community. And so they came out to Waianae, and we conducted classes in Waianae. I say we because I was invited by Ho'ipo to join in this community discussion of looking at education. And so we developed theories and papers on the subject of education. Some of these things, if you would like to see written documentation or materials printed out, I believe I have most of it printed on my website. It's called HawaiianPerspectives.org. And if you go down to the column dealing with education, you may find some of these papers on the subject of education and purpose of education. And what we essentially said is that for many communities, the outlook or the expectation of education is different from the general community. For indigenous communities, the purpose of education is oftentimes to maintain that continuity of national consciousness, of indigenous consciousness, to remember who we are, where we come from, our relationships to our environment, to our sense of God or gods, our language, and all of these things, to retain these things as we are pushed into and forced into a colonial world. Because we find that we are sort of giving up our children the future of our continuity of consciousness, not the future, the content, the treasure chest of this continuity of consciousness. And we are ceding them to a colonial entity which call themselves the education system. And oftentimes it's not really education, it's brainwashing. They provide false information, for example, the information with regards to how we became Americans, how we became United States citizens. The history of the overthrow, never told, at least to me, going throughout my educational career in public schools, from kindergarten to 12th grade. And we never heard this story of the overthrow. So while we assume that the education system is an accurate system that places all available information to the student, we find that the information becomes very selective, and when not selective, they also include lies within the education system. Free thinking? Well, not necessarily so. When you try to speak up against certain policies or certain educational doctrines being placed in the system, you are stepped on, you are pushed down, you are pushed out, especially when you challenge the general theories of who's the father of our country. You know, it's this white man, George Washington. What happened to Paea Kamehameha? What happened to Kauikeao'oli? What happened to our heroes? And we do have many, but they are all suppressed, never mentioned. And today, if mentioned as what? Extracurricular activities? So education is very political. Education is very culturally sensitive. Education is not, benign, not neutral. Education is always based on values. Western values seems to have taken over much of it. And I'm not saying it's necessarily bad. All information, all sources of knowledge is good. But to be able to make the comparison between one expectation, one expression of knowledge as opposed to another is necessary. Information, choices, being able to form opinions based on a conglomeration of views is important. There is this phenomena. It's called Aurora Borealis. Okay? And normally you see it when you go further north. I don't know if you go south, you will see the same effects. It's Aurora Borealis. Maybe some of the listeners can call in and correct me or inform me. But I understand that as you go far enough north, in the Canadian areas and perhaps above that, you will see this phenomena of lights. It's like a light show. And you see many different lights up in the skies, and they seem to be playing a game of chase or trickery and all that kind of stuff. The Native Americans or the Canadians, the native folks of Canada, the First Nations of Canada, they're preferably called, says that it's coyote having fun with the other animals, and they explain what is happening with Aurora Borealis. And it fits very well within their scheme of things, within their explanation, their cosmology of the world. Western science looks at it and says it's different electrons being shot across the sky because of either temperature changes or whatever the changes may be. And so they have a very scientific explanation. Which explanation is correct? Which explanation is full? Which explanation better answers the needs of the people? It depends on who the people are, what their needs are. But at least we should be entitled to hear the different theories and not be swept over by poo-pooing the theory of the native people and only elevating the theories of Western knowledge. Education is very important. It is culturally bound. We look at the color black as if it's negative. So what happens when you get blackballed? You get blacklisted. And then they take that kind of language and they apply it to social relationships. So all those black people are somehow less than the whites, the good side, the light, as opposed to the dark. Dark Africa and all of those things. Those are culturally bound. They are not benign. They are not neutral. For the Hawaiians, it is that blackness, it is that darkness, it is that night that creativity comes about. Cultural bound again. But who teaches us those things? When we're dealing with math, math is very neutral. 1 and 1 is 2 in any culture. 2 and 2 is 4 in any culture. This is math, but not if you change the base of your numbering system, or not if you change into a more social effect. When you have 2 people working together, the result is far more than 2. Cooperation among people can expand exponentially the results if you're working in harmony with one another. So how do you input this kind of sense of culture within your numbering system? So mathematics does not apply in all possible cases. And yet if we continue to elevate mathematics, then we miss out on the real value of cooperation. Culture bound. Okay, anyway, I'm not only explaining what we talked about last night, but I'm beginning to talk about it and expand on some of these issues even more. So I'll stop it. If you would like to call, our telephone number here is 524-1080. So we talked about education, and if you have any theories or any comments on educational philosophy and that kind of stuff, give me a call at 524-1080. Sometimes when we have new teachers coming to Waianae, I'm asked, and my wife is asked, to speak to these incoming teachers to try to, acculturate them to the Waianae community. And so these are some of the stuff that we generally talk about. Okay, let's go to our telephones. Our telephone number here is 524-1080. Let me be sure that I have my telephone lines up and greet the caller. Aloha, caller. Welcome to the program.
Good morning, Polka.
Hey, good morning.
Well, I'll try to hear you better this time.
Oh, okay.
I don't know where to start with all that you've introduced, especially since you've been expanding on it. Going back to the GMOs and why isn't it being printed? I think the question should be asked, well, why shouldn't it be? I mean, I think if we realize, and to me this is reality, that the people are being used as experimental animals. We all know there's a law against that. So this is the loophole that they've always found in order to go around the law. Mm-hmm. If they knew that it was good, it would be printed in bright red. You wouldn't have any hesitation about putting that on the label. Mm-hmm. But they don't know. So what they want is proof of what it does. So we'll have to be subjected to it for a couple of years and then wait and see what it does. Then they'll have the results. That's how these kinds of experiments are done on what we consider as animals. Mm-hmm. Now, there's a great reaction against using animals in experiments, so they're going to use us.
Market. Yes.
Now, that's all I have to say for that at the moment. Moving on to education, I think if we look at the word, the basic word, analyze what does the word educate mean. It really comes from the root educe, which means to lead out from. So an educator, which would be on a different plane than an instructor, which means to build a structure inside. An educator is meant to draw out what is inside of the person. And that's where we miss or have corrupted the use of educate. An educated mass means their consciousness has been expanded. This is what the power holders do not want. That's why they are now in the move towards globalization, destroying our educational system, or what we had, because they want to be able to control everybody. Anybody who asks questions, what happens to them? Anybody who exposes what they're doing, what happens to them? So this means, in order to speak against them, one must not only know what they're talking about, they must have great courage and face the results of the speaking. Now it's your turn.
My turn. Okay. First, let me ask for clarification. Educate, again, the root of that word is?
Educe. E-D-U-C-E.
Educe.
Duce means lead. E comes from X, means, in this case, means to lead out of.
Okay. To lead out of. I'm taking notes.
Well, you know, the only thing I have is words. I don't have anything else.
No, it's very interesting, that comparison. I never saw it that way.
If I might interrupt, I know I shouldn't, but I will. That's what's been lost. The language itself has been corrupted, and that's how I knew that language had to be the tool, the path of the way out, because that's the way we were led in instead of out.
Okay. Well, If you're waiting for an intelligent response, I don't have one.
I don't know what will happen to these ideas. I'm just throwing the cards on the table. If anybody can use them, pick them up.
Yeah, I think they're very, very important. Now, what I want you to do, because at times we say you need to say it at least 3 times, but I'm not going to ask you to do that. I'm going to ask you to, again, very concisely go through it. The difference between educate and the difference from that to instruct.
Well, instruct, take the language apart. In, okay, means in. Struct is the building of something. There's structure and stuff, and construct. And so to instruct is to put something in, to build a structure within.
Yes.
Then a roughly thumbnail look at it, I think they might progress to teach, which I haven't analyzed that word yet. Has the word ache in it, I think. Teacher, and then possibly professor.
Yes.
Something like that. I think I'm leaving something out, but I forget what it is. I had 4 of them, but okay. 3 will do it now. And then professor. So you have a person professes, lives what they profess. Through FESS, as in confession. I have to analyze what I think I know what FESS means, but it's so biologically or chemically oriented that I can't go into it now. But looking at the word FESS, as in confess, and other words too, there is a meaning to that. And so PRO means through living that way. It's an action. It also has ION on the end, which indicates action, as in the word action itself. So then you have a person who lives it, as you would have a guru. And so and we can match all these things up cross-culturally, and even into religion. Religion can be analyzed on a chemical level. That's getting pretty basic. They don't like it, but it's true. But we dare not go there yet. So, at any rate, is that enough?
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Thank you very much.
Okay, good luck.
And call back again.
Okay,
take care. Aloha.
Bye-bye.
I just noticed the time, and I should be going very quickly to some music.
Kaulana nā pua o Hawaii Kupa'a mahope o ka aina Iki mai ka elele o ka loko ino Pala pala anunu me ka paka